Morning came thin and colorless over the auction grounds, the kind of dawn that felt borrowed rather than earned. Frost clung to the rails, and every breath hung briefly before breaking apart. Trucks idled in uneven rows, coughing smoke, while men stamped their feet and spoke in low, practical tones. Somewhere metal rang against metal, a gate slapped shut, and a horse answered with a dull, impatient thud of hoof. This was not a place for ceremony. It was a place where weight, age, and muscle were translated into numbers, and where silence often meant the difference between going home and being left behind. Even the sky seemed unwilling to watch for long, hovering pale and distant above everything there. She stood near the fence with her hands tucked into the sleeves of a jacket that had once belonged to her father. Her boots were cracked at the toes, dusted white with frost, and she kept shifting her weight as if unsure she deserved the ground beneath her. People passed without noticing, eyes already calculating. She had learned that invisibility early, on a ranch where losses accumulated quietly and pride was rationed. The sale was supposed to help. It was supposed to turn animals into cash and cash into time. Time to fix fences, pay notes, and pretend hope was still practical. Her father said little that morning, which somehow weighed more than anger in the cold air around them. The auctioneer's voice rose and fell like machinery, efficient and detached, shaving meaning from every life that passed through the ring. Horses moved through quickly, heads pulled up, flanks slapped, their stories compressed into seconds. A mare went for less than a used tire. A gelding limped and still found a buyer. The girl watched all of it, her face still, her jaw set, memorizing the way indifference sounded. She told herself she was there only to observe, to learn prices, to be useful later. That was easier than admitting how each gavel strike landed somewhere behind her ribs. It reminded her of nights counting feed bags, subtracting, never arriving at enough. Always stopping before the numbers could finish her, the way they sometimes did when no one was watching. She noticed him late, almost missed him entirely. He stood apart at the far end, half hidden by a post, his coat an uneven patchwork of dull brown and old scars. One ear tipped inward as if listening to something private. His neck was thick but poorly muscled, and when he shifted, his back leg faltered before settling again. No one lingered near his pen. The space around him stayed oddly clean, like avoidance made visible. The tag on the gate fluttered, numbers smudged, history reduced to a guess. She felt an unexpected tightness, the kind that arrives before understanding. It unsettled her because nothing about him asked to be noticed. And yet something in his stillness refused to disappear, even as eyes slid past him again and again there. When his turn came, the ring quieted only because there was nothing to say. The auctioneer cleared his throat, adjusted the microphone, and began with a price that felt more like a suggestion than an expectation. No hands rose. Boots shifted. Someone laughed softly, not unkindly, just bored. The horse did not react. He stood with his head low, eyes dull, as if he had already learned the rhythm of being passed over. The girl felt heat rise behind her eyes, sudden and unwelcome. It was not pity exactly, but recognition, sharp and personal. She remembered standing in kitchens where decisions were made without her. Remembered how quiet could feel like erasure if allowed. She swallowed and forced herself to keep breathing while the moment threatened to pass entirely unnoticed. Her father stood a few steps behind her, hat pulled low, shoulders rigid. He had taught her how to read animals, how to listen for what they could not say. He had also taught her restraint, the discipline of surviving lean years by refusing unnecessary risk. She felt that lesson now, heavy as the ledger waiting at home. Buying anything today was foolish. Buying this horse bordered on irresponsible. She could already hear the quiet arguments that would follow, the careful arithmetic. Drought did not forgive sentiment. Banks did not either. Still, she did not look away from the ring. Something inside her waited, alert as if for permission. It unsettled her more than fear ever had in years past. The auctioneer dropped the price again, voice flattening. The paw stretched. Dust motes drifted through the slanted light, suspended like held breath. The girl's fingers curled inside her sleeves, nails pressing skin. She told herself to stay still, to let the moment end. But the horse lifted his head slightly then, just enough for one eye to catch the light, and it was not empty. It was waiting. The realization struck her with a quiet force, steady and undeniable. Waiting was not weakness. Waiting was endurance, learned the hard way. She recognized it because she had been doing the same. All morning. All year. Longer than she liked to admit. The ring felt suddenly smaller, closer around her now alone. Before she fully understood what she was doing, her hand began to rise. It moved slowly as if testing the air, as if asking permission from forces she did not believe in. Her father shifted behind her. The auctioneer glanced up, surprised, hope flickering briefly across his practiced expression. The girl's heart hammered, loud enough she thought others might hear. She did not look at the crowd. She looked only at the horse. In that instant, the arithmetic of survival loosened its grip. She was no longer calculating loss, only answering something simple and human. The bid left her mouth quietly, barely more than a breath. Across the ring, the horse stilled as if listening again. No one laughed this time. The hammer hovered. Everything waited on what came next. The hammer fell with a flat, final sound that seemed to surprise everyone, including the horse. For a moment nothing moved. Then the auctioneer nodded, already turning away, and the world resumed its noise. The girl lowered her hand slowly as if unsure it belonged to her now. Her father exhaled behind her, a long breath she had not noticed him holding. Around them, buyers drifted off, uninterested. The transaction had passed unnoticed, a footnote. Yet something irreversible had happened. She felt it in her chest, a mixture of fear and resolve, as if a door had quietly closed behind her. They walked toward the pen together, their steps measured, boots crunching frost and gravel. The horse watched them approach, his ears shifting, one forward, one back, uncertainty written into every line of his body. Up close, his scars told stories without words. Old rope burns crossed his shoulders. A healed gash ran along his flank, pale against darker hair. His mane hung unevenly as if cut in a hurry long ago. He smelled of dust and old hay, nothing sweet. The girl stopped just outside the gate, not wanting to crowd him. She remembered lessons learned young. Patience was a language animals understood better than force. Her father rested a hand on the fence, eyes narrowed, studying the horse the way he studied clouds before deciding whether rain was worth believing in. "He's had a rough go," he said quietly. It was not a question. She nodded, though he hadn't asked. They stood together in silence, the kind shaped by years of shared work and unspoken worry. She knew what he was thinking. Vet bills. Feed costs. Time they did not have. She also knew he would not stop her now. Whatever this was, it had already begun. The realization steadied her, even as it frightened her with its weight. She reached out slowly, letting her hand rest against the gate first, then inch closer. The horse shifted but did not retreat. His eye, clouded slightly, followed her movement. When her fingers finally brushed his neck, he flinched, then held still. His skin twitched beneath her touch, sensitive, wary. She did not pull away. She breathed evenly, matching her rhythm to his. The moment stretched, fragile as glass. Around them, the auction noise faded into background hum. This was no grand connection, no sudden trust. It was smaller, harder earned. A tolerance. A truce. Enough to begin with. Loading him took time. He hesitated at the ramp, testing the boards with one hoof, then another. Someone offered advice. Someone else lost interest. The girl stayed near his shoulder, murmuring nonsense, words without meaning but full of calm. Eventually he stepped up, slow and deliberate. Inside the trailer, he stood stiffly, legs braced, as if expecting the floor to give way. When the door closed, the sound rang sharp, final. She pressed her forehead briefly against the cool metal, feeling the vibration of his breathing through it. Ownership felt heavier now, more real than the raised hand had. The drive home passed mostly in silence. The trailer hummed behind them, every bump transmitted through the truck. The girl watched fence lines blur past, fields pale and tired from winter. Her father gripped the wheel, jaw set. She knew he was calculating again, counting costs, imagining conversations yet to come. She wondered what she was calculating, if anything. All she felt was a strange clarity, like the moment after choosing a direction without a map. The horse shifted occasionally, the sound of hooves against wood grounding her. He was there. That was undeniable. Everything else could wait. At the ranch, dusk gathered quickly, staining the sky a muted blue. They unloaded him into an empty paddock, the fence recently mended, wire still bright. He stepped down carefully, head low, nostrils flaring as he took in unfamiliar ground. Other horses watched from a distance, ears pricked, curious but cautious. He did not acknowledge them. Instead, he stood still as if unsure the space was truly his. The girl fetched water, the metal bucket cold against her hands. When she set it down, he sniffed, then drank sparingly, eyes never leaving her face. Night settled in layers. The ranch quieted, punctuated by the creak of wood and the soft sounds of animals shifting. The girl returned alone, lantern swinging, casting warm light across the paddock. The horse stood where she had left him. He had not rolled, had not wandered. He looked smaller in the glow, scars softened by shadow. She sat on the fence rail, close enough to be seen, far enough to give him space. She spoke quietly, telling him nothing important. Her voice was steady. She realized she was telling herself too that this could work. Later, inside, her father laid the auction receipt on the table. The number stared back at them, modest but not insignificant. He tapped it once, then folded the paper carefully. "We'll need the vet," he said. "Soon." She nodded. There was no argument in her, only acceptance. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. She thought of the horse standing alone, learning new sounds, new boundaries. She wondered what he had learned before this, what had taught him to wait so patiently for nothing. The thought tightened something deep in her chest. She went back out once more before bed. The lantern carved a small circle of light, the rest swallowed by dark. The horse turned his head as she approached. This time, when she stopped at the fence, he took a single step toward her. Just one. It was not trust. It was not hope. It was a question, tentative and brave. She did not answer it yet. She only stood there, heart pounding, realizing that whatever story he carried, it was heavier than scars, and it had not ended at the auction. The horse did not sleep much that first week. The girl knew because neither did she. Each night carried a thin restlessness that drifted from the paddock into the house, a quiet vigilance she felt even through closed windows. In the mornings, she found him standing exactly where she had last seen him, as if movement were a risk he had not yet calculated. His feed remained half-finished. His water touched but not trusted. She learned his habits by absence, by what did not change. It unsettled her, this patience shaped by fear, and it stirred a need she could not yet name. The vet arrived on the fourth day, his truck older than most, paint faded by years of honest work. He moved slowly, deliberately, hands sure without being hurried. The horse tolerated the examination with rigid compliance, muscles locked, eyes distant. When the vet pressed along his back, a tremor ran through him, quick and contained. The girl saw it. The vet did too. He said little at first, listening to breath, watching reactions. When he finally stepped back, his expression had shifted, professional calm threaded with concern. "These aren't pasture injuries," he said. "They're learned." That word lingered. What? It suggested time, repetition, intention. The girl felt something inside her tilt. The vet explained what he could without dramatizing it. Old fractures set poorly. Scar tissue from restraints used too often, too hard. A leg that would never move freely again. None of it recent. None of it accidental. He spoke in careful terms, but the meaning settled heavy. This horse had been valuable once, valuable enough to be pushed past what was fair. When that value ended, so had the care. The girl listened, hands clenched, anger unfamiliar and precise forming quietly behind her ribs. After the vet left, the ranch seemed louder, every sound sharpened. Ed by implication. The girl began to notice details she had overlooked. The way the horse startled at certain movements. How he flinched when ropes brushed the fence. How his breathing changed when the wind rattled loose metal. She adjusted her routines, moved slower, spoke before approaching. Each small accommodation felt like translation, learning a dialect shaped by harm. Her father watched all of this without comment, his silence no longer neutral. At night, she heard him pacing, steps measured, burdened by thoughts that had found no easy place to rest. She began to ask questions. Quiet ones at feed stores, over phone calls that stretched late into the evening. The horse's tag number opened doors to old records, dusty and incomplete. Names surfaced, then vanished again, linked by brief transactions and longer silences. A retired trainer remembered the horse vaguely, a promising runner once, fast out of the gate, stubborn at the finish. "Too much heart," he'd said as if that were a flaw. Another voice mentioned an injury, then changed the subject. Each fragment felt like a piece of something deliberately broken apart. The girl started keeping notes, dates and names written carefully in a spiral notebook. It felt strange, this act of documentation, as if she were trespassing into territory reserved for people with more authority. Yet the more she learned, the less she could unlearn. The horse had not drifted here by chance. He had been passed along, reshaped by expectations that cared little for endurance. When his body failed to comply, he was reduced, hidden, sold cheaply. The system that allowed this did not announce itself. It operated quietly, efficiently, counting on fatigue and forgetfulness. The girl felt the weight of that knowledge settle onto her shoulders. Her father finally spoke one evening as they stood by the fence, watching the horse graze in small, careful steps. "You know this could get complicated," he said. His voice held no accusation, only weariness. She nodded. Complications were familiar. Drought, debt, weather. This was different though. This was human-made. She told him what she had found, what she suspected. He listened without interrupting, eyes fixed on the horizon. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Truth has a cost." It was not a warning. It was a fact. The horse began to change in subtle ways. He started finishing his feed. He shifted his weight more freely, testing limits. Once, when she brushed him gently, he leaned into the pressure, surprised by his own response. The moment passed quickly, but it mattered. Healing, she realized, was not dramatic. It was incremental, uneven, often invisible. The contrast between his growing ease and the story unfolding behind him sharpened her resolve. The more whole he became, the clearer the injustice appeared. She could not separate the two anymore. A letter arrived one afternoon, forwarded from an office she had contacted weeks earlier. It confirmed what the fragments had suggested. The horse had raced under another name, had placed well enough to matter. His injury had been documented, then quietly dismissed. Insurance had paid out. Responsibility had evaporated. The girl sat at the table, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. Outside, the horse lifted his head, ears forward, sensing her presence. The connection between them felt suddenly charged, no longer just care but obligation. She understood now that saving him was only the beginning, and that what came next would ask more of her than patience alone. She folded the letter carefully, as if creasing it too sharply might make the truth louder than she was ready for. The house felt smaller, walls closing in with the knowledge now trapped inside them. Out in the fading light, the horse shifted, testing his leg, then steadied, trusting the ground to hold. She watched him through the window and felt the quiet certainty settle in her chest. Whatever had been taken from him was not finished taking. And whatever path had led him here was still unspooling, waiting for someone to decide how far it would go. She knew walking away would be its final. The morning was crisp, sun barely cresting the horizon, washing the paddock in muted gold that made the frost glimmer like shattered glass. The horse moved carefully, testing the ground under his hooves, his breath rising in thin white clouds. The girl watched from the fence, lantern swinging forgotten in the corner of the barn, eyes tracing every muscle, every careful step. The weeks of patience, of quiet observation, had begun to show. He was not healed fully, not physically, not yet, but he was moving as if he owned the world around him, tentative but unafraid. It was a small miracle, built from countless unnoticed acts. Steady hands, whispered words, measured feed, and the trust she refused to demand. The vet returned, older than she remembered, carrying his bag and the weight of his cautious experience. He moved slowly, assessing the horse without making a sound that could disturb the fragile calm. Knees bent, hands pressing, eyes sharp, he noted the improvement. "Better than I expected," he murmured, voice low. He ran fingers over the old scars, and the horse flinched only slightly, a tremor that passed almost like acknowledgement. The girl's chest lifted with a quiet relief, but she kept her expression neutral. Relief was a fragile thing, showing it could make it vanish. She had learned to contain emotions the same way she had learned to contain hope. It was mid-morning when the first notice arrived. A letter, stamped official, edged with bureaucracy, landed on the porch like a cold gust. Her father opened it with fingers that betrayed none of the tension she felt. He read in silence, brow furrowed, lips compressed. She waited, leaning against the railing, hands gripping the wood like an anchor. When he finally spoke, it was measured, careful. "They want to inspect him. Verify ownership. Confirm condition." The words sounded simple, almost mundane, but they carried the weight of consequence. This was the reckoning she had known would come, the one that demanded more than patience or affection. By afternoon, they were at the inspection site, a small, formal space with white fences, freshly mowed grass, and an air of quiet authority. Officials moved with practiced neutrality, not cruelty but not kindness either. The horse stood with a subtle tension, ears forward, muscles coiled like springs. He had learned caution well. She walked beside him, hand resting on his flank, whispering quiet reassurances. Her father stayed close but said nothing. Words could not prepare you for scrutiny, only presence could. The officials noted papers, checked tags, tapped pens. They measured and observed, their eyes trained to seek flaws, yet they did not see the resilience beneath scars, the patience forged in neglect. The girl felt a swell of protectiveness she had never known before, a moral insistence that this animal, this being, be seen fully, not merely as a document, a tag, a liability. When one official reached for a file, she interjected softly, presenting her own observations, the notes she had kept, the timeline of injuries and care. The atmosphere shifted imperceptibly. They listened, skeptically first, then with an unmistakable recognition that she knew, even before their expressions admitted it. The horse shifted as if sensing her resolve, standing taller, the weight of prior dismissal lifting in small increments. Hours passed in quiet observation. The officials asked questions she could answer, precisely and calmly. Her father added details sparingly, enough to validate, not to dominate. She spoke of days and nights of care, of tentative steps toward trust, of the way a frightened animal could teach courage in silence. The horse, for his part, stayed close to her, ears swiveling at each sound but never pulling away. It was a tableau of patience and moral certainty, a living argument against indifference. Finally, one official nodded, and the room felt lighter, not because victory was declared, but because justice had begun to register in those who had overlooked it. Returning to the ranch, the air felt different. The wind carried promise rather than warning. The girl walked along the paddock, eyes following the horse as he explored freely, muscles flowing with the newfound confidence of safety. The scars were still visible, and they always would be, but they were no longer marks of shame. They were testaments to survival, to endurance, to the quiet victories of those who persist unseen. She stepped close, hand brushing along his flank, feeling the warmth beneath the coat. He leaned into her touch this time, steady, certain. It was trust earned over long, careful days, and the proof of her own perseverance mirrored in his patience. Evening fell with a softness rare for the season, casting long shadows that danced across the fence posts. The girl walked out to the pasture, calling him softly. He trotted toward her, ears pricked, mane glinting faintly in the fading light. She reached out, and he lowered his head against her shoulder. The contact was small, intimate, a shared acknowledgement of hardship and endurance. No words were needed. No ceremony, no grand gesture. Just presence, connection, and the quiet power of someone noticing what had been hidden for too long. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the rhythm of his breathing and the certainty that justice had arrived in increments, not in shouts. Later, she sat on the fence, watching the horse move with tentative freedom, shadows stretching long across the field. Her father joined her, hands tucked into pockets, the weight of relief and pride settling between them. He said nothing at first. Words would have diminished the moment. The girl understood. Healing, she realized, was not a single event. It was a series of choices, quiet acts, and patient observation. She had learned the power of seeing, of refusing to accept the world's verdict on someone else's worth. And now, the horse moved through the paddock as if claiming that worth for himself. A final letter arrived weeks later, confirming the former owner's neglect had been documented and the insurance irregularities investigated. The system, slow and reluctant, had begun to acknowledge what she and the horse already knew. No triumphs were celebrated. No loud proclamations were made. Justice had seeped quietly, deliberately, like light through the barn windows at dawn. Outside, the horse shifted his weight, sniffing the air, hooves firm on the ground. The girl approached, hand outstretched, and he came willingly, as if to say that even when the world moves slowly, recognition arrives for those who endure. Night settled over the ranch like a soft blanket. The girl lingered by the fence, eyes following the horse as he moved toward the barn, then paused, ears twitching as if sensing something beyond her sight. She watched him stand there, silhouette outlined against the fading glow, every scar visible but softened in the darkness. And in that quiet, still moment, she understood that this was not an ending. It was a beginning, the first time he would choose to move forward, not merely survive. The field around them seemed larger, freer, and for the first time in a long while, so did she. The last light of day glimmered across the frost, catching the edges of his mane, the curve of his shoulder, the strength in his stance. She reached out, fingertips brushing the hair along his neck, and for the first time the world felt in balance. The injustice, the scars, the months of fear, they were all present, yet they no longer defined the story. What remained was endurance, recognition, and the quiet triumph of someone finally being seen. The girl stepped back, heart steady, knowing she had kept a promise she had not yet spoken aloud. And in that hush, as the horse turned his head toward her with something like acknowledgement in his eye, she felt the full weight and the fragile joy of knowing that true courage is measured in patience and persistence, not applause. The horizon darkened, yet the paddock glowed faintly in gold and frost, and she realized that every small act of care had carved a space where justice could finally take root. The horse shifted, hooves crunching lightly against frozen earth, and the girl understood that while the past could not be rewritten, the future could now be claimed. The story was far from over, but in that singular moment, both knew that the hardest battles had been won quietly, and that what remained would be theirs to shape together.